The World Bank is looking to provide 500 million people with solar mini-grids in order to close the energy access gap, particularly in Africa. Now, according to the World Bank, 8 out of 10 people in Africa live without electricity. Solar mini-grids that offer lower greenhouse emissions and are a cost-effective option could help to bridge that power gap before 2030. The World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistant program is now working with governments to take mini-grids from just a niche to a mainstream solution for more than 60% of Africa's population. Now, of course, this is all based on a report, and let's take that report apart with Suleiman Babamanu. He's the Nigerian Program Director at the firm RMI. Great to have you with us on the show, sir. Now, of course, when we talk about mini-grids, one thing we have to acknowledge is that they're not a new phenomenon in Africa. In fact, they've been touted as one of the more viable solutions to Africa's power crisis and, of course, the deficit as well. Now, according to this report, the overall pace of mini-grid development in Africa or globally as well is not on track to achieve that SDG 2030 goal. So give us some more insight into what you've seen in terms of the pace of growth so far in Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Indeed, it is not a new phenomenon. And over time, we've seen how the mini-grid sector has actually grown. In fact, if you go through the World Bank report, you would see that it's quite encouraging that there are almost 22,000 mini-grids that are currently serving close to 50 million people. And more than 10,000 of these mini-grids are actually solar PV solutions. And when you look at like the near-term kind of plans, there is about 30,000 mini-grids that have been planned. 95% of them that is expected to be in Africa and South Asia, which is expected to connect about 35 million people. However, looking at the energy access gap and the huge number of people that don't have access to reliable electricity, there's still a lot that needs to be done. And even going through the report, we need around close to over 200,000 mini grids between now and 2030 to be able to reach universal energy access at a cost of staggering about $127 billion. The interesting thing again is that countries, financiers, developers are actually gearing up, and either with policies and regulations, financiers having to bring about like products that would help to finance these mini grids, and multilateral organizations that are coming up with subsidy and grants programs to help to bridge this gap.
Well, let's talk a bit about those solar solutions that you talked about earlier, because the report also says that solar mini grids are a viable option to connect about 490 million people by 2030, and that's in Africa and other markets. It also said that a combination of falling costs of key components, new digital solutions as technology, and of course favorable economies of scale are some of the factors that could help this happen. When we talk about achieving that SDG goal, which is basically seeing 930 million people on mini grids by 2030. But what exactly would you say then are the factors that are still holding back the fast adoption of reaching that goal going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as much as we see a lot of progress in this space, for us to be able to achieve scale, we need to look at mini grids from just one or two projects to like a portfolio approach. And in doing this, it would help to sort of reduce the cost while we're optimizing the design of each mini grids. Now, in doing that also would help to improve the commercial viability of these mini grids, which will attract the necessary financing to be able to build them, in their hundreds and thousands. It's also very important that we're engaging the communities as the customers that we're serving, understanding their needs and designing systems that suit those. Also, we have to look at as we think about the scale, we need to also be able to address the skills gap that are, needed to be able to achieve this huge amount of mini grids that are likely coming online at RMI through our Energy Transition Academy. This is something that we have taken very seriously, and we're actively working across government, utilities, and developers to be able to address these gaps. It's also important that governments are bringing about the right set of regulations and policies to empower mini grid companies, because those are mostly private companies. In Nigeria, for example, there's a mini grid policy which is arguably one of the best in the continent,
Mm.
and so you have different countries having different approach, from private sector to public sector approach. We also have to have the right type of business models, and the right type of financing structure and mechanisms to be able to finance these projects. And what is also very important is, energy for productive use, and looking at what type of appliances can we bring into these communities to make sure that mini grids and electricity indeed is used productively, and for economic development in these communities. And these are some of the things that needs to happen to be able to help to achieve scale and bridge this huge energy access gap.
Hmm. Well, let's talk a bit about those business models and infrastructure you mentioned. And I'm certainly curious to know what the industry is going to look like going forward in terms of the trends that are taking place right now. The report talks about a third generation mini grid, which it calls a grid interconnection ready. Now, of course, though some of us don't really understand what this means. But talk to us about this infrastructure, how the industry is transforming as it develops, both in terms of not just infrastructure, but also business models as well.
Right. Again, this is a very important piece. When you talk about interconnection ready, so a component of the mini grid regulation speaks about what happens when the grid arrives, because the concept of isolated mini grids is that they are built in locations that are quite far away from existing utility connections. So if eventually the utilities, or in countries like Nigeria that we refer to them as the discos, decide to extend the grid to these communities, then it is important that these mini grids are built to the level and standard that they're able to interconnect with the utilities very easily. And so, when you look at, leveraging on, latest technologies and innovative strategies that you would, need to be able to ensure that your distribution infrastructure, your generation and metering are actually using the latest technologies. So from, for example, energy management systems, smart metering, and kind of latest solar hybrid technology also helps to, allow for this interconnection. The good thing about this is, a lot of utilities are seeing, the importance of working together with private developers, and looking at what we want to call utility enabled DERs, where you have a tripartite agreement between the utility, the customer, and the private developer, and the mini grid, for example, where you have a win-win-win situation, in that kind of community. And also very important is, incorporating energy efficient appliances, like I mentioned, for productive use. What are the type of appliances that we're using in mini grids that are actually customized and designed to be able to, um, could be compatible with the mini grids that we have built, and the type of voltage and current that we have in the mini grid. Of course, these all makes mini grids to become interconnection ready,
Mm.
and of course these partnerships as well is also very, very crucial in making that happen.
Mm. Well, it's certainly very exciting, the prospects in this sector. We do have to leave it there, Mr. Baba Manu, but thank you so much for those great insights and joining us on the show today. That, of course, is Suleiman Baba Manu, Nigeria Program Director at RMI.